Yes. Um, what I want to do, Sarah says I have 15 minutes, so I'm going to try and talk about four quick slides within the 15 minutes, and just give everybody a little bit of an update of what's happening with UProtocol and some of the additional things that GM has done, recently announced last week in the news with Covisa as well, which I think is relevant for this audience. So. I want to remind everybody what the purpose of UProtocol is that we have, right? Um, our goal is to be able to provide a way to connect applications and services anywhere. So before we start building this application ecosystem, this ecosystem of services that I'll talk about later on, we need to have a way of communicating to these apps and services, regardless of where they are, what system they're running on, what transport protocol they use underneath the hood, and so on. And so the purpose of UProtocol is building that communication infrastructure so we can then write easily applications and services. So um, there are many pieces to this puzzle, right? So we started, I have a little bit of a timeline in my second slide, but I want to just talk about the pieces of this puzzle that have to come together. And it's not just open sourcing one project and we're done and Bob's your uncle. What you have to do is, we have to build a lot of these different pieces of this puzzle in order to have a complete story so we can then build these apps and services. So we need things like developer tools, so it's very easy to um, deploy and build these apps and services, obviously. We need SDKs that implement the functional low-level portions of the protocol that are standard, like building topics and URIs, building cloud events, building other objects, so a standard data model, interface definitions, and so on. We need the platforms that run that we can run these apps and services on, right? Cloud platforms, Linux, Android, and so on. We also need implementations of these transport abstraction layers. So I need to be able to have all these different transports that implement the common interface so the developer experience is consistent across the platforms. And also, we need to have a rich set of services. Now, it's not necessarily part of the protocol. I appended it on the end for a reason, and that leads to the announcement that we made that I'll talk about at the end. Um, so, what we've done really is, in March, we put out there our initial spec of what we've put out in our deployments in our limited ecosystem of just, a couple of platforms and a couple of services and a couple of applications that we're expanding this ecosystem. So in October, we've gotten great collaboration from Daniel and working on the Rust SDK. GM has been very actively working on the C++ SDK because we plan to use it in our Linux environment. So we need to make sure that our SDKs for C++ are at the same caliber of our Java one because our initial apps and services and platforms were written in Java. Um, Additionally, over the last few months, been very busy in, taking all the lessons learned, feedback from the community, and getting ready to deploy this in our, 2.0 like architecture with um, running ASIL B type of applications and services. Taking all those lessons learned, and from that, defining the missing interfaces that weren't there before, like the U-Transport interface. Some of the new data models and so on. We've been coding that and it's on branches in the Java SDK. You'll see both the C++ and the Java SDK very heavily um, worked on along with the Rust one that's coming very soon. Also working with the Velocitus team and trying to get their tooling environment set up and working for the protocol support and what does that mean and so on. We can talk about that in detail later. Obviously not in my 15 minutes because I'm already more than half over. So, but a lot of these things are what we're putting together for what we're calling 1.5 of the protocol. What we originally open sourced and put in our production was the 136, and then there's 1.4, and I have a little bit of history diagram that we can talk about later. But anyway, in addition to that, we're also working on in GM, the Python SDK because we have a lot of environments that we'd like to run in emulators and other things for testing all these services and functionality. So that's with a Python-based SDK. We're putting out there, in collaboration with Zscaler and with other companies, we're putting out transport implementations like the Binder one, the Zeno one, and so on, and the stub generator, which really shows how you take those services that are being defined, and from it you compile them into client-side code and server-side code that you can implement that uses these SDKs and uses the libraries and brings things together. And so without all of these pieces of the puzzle, it's very difficult to see what the image is that you're trying to build. I mean, obviously you have the instruction manual, like you saw in the previous slide, that's helping you through the process. But until we have all the pieces of the puzzle, it's hard to put together the full story. And that's why, I feel the frustration of the community about that. That's, they see all these things. GM is talking about all this. We're trying to get all of the different parts out there as quick as possible for people to start pulling in, playing with it, using it, working with it. And so additionally, coming very soon is we're working on a cloud platform with Microsoft. We're putting out an Android platform. There's still a Linux platform that we need to develop. That means like it's something running in a Linux environment that implements the U subscription, U discovery, U streamer, U bus, those kind of components, and also all the additional transports that exist that people might want to use, like MQTT, SumIP, DDS, and so on. So there's a lot of things that, just because of the scale, we can't, as GM, put everything out there. And plus, in our production vehicles, we might not be using, let's say, one of these transports, but another company might be using the transport. Some people, their business is selling certain products, so they can go out there and put out there, the platform that they build or something. So we're trying to get the support from the community to complete the puzzle and put out there enough that we can have this large hackathon and developers can start developing apps and developing services on top of that. And so this roadmap is constantly evolving, and there's been identified a need that we need to have like a weekly sync up because there are members of the community that are working with us in developing those missing parts, like the missing SDKs, transports, platforms, and so on. And so, last slide, because I have only a couple of seconds left, is that you might have seen in the news that GM did this push to open source our services, so the U services. And what we've done in order to build a software-defined vehicle, we've structurally from our organization and code-wise, we split it into teams building apps, teams building services, teams building the platforms and implementing the protocol. And so in order to build the software-defined vehicle, splitting the personas of the developers and the roles and responsibilities makes it very easy for us to build a lot of these apps, services, and platforms and scaling out in a production environment. But in order to really show the benefits of this solution and ecosystem, you need to put something out there. So there was VSS before that was all signal based. Covisa was working heavily on something called the Vehicle Service Catalog, but there wasn't a proposal out there. So what GM did is, we said, okay, we have our U services that are that define all of these standard vehicle type services. It's compatible with UProtocol and some of the UProtocol projects. So we thought, let's open source it. Let's use it as a starting point for conversation with the community to gain feedback, to look at lessons learned, and so on. And we chose Covisa because they were already working on VSC. They were already working in defining the services and service catalogs. And it's not dependent on UProtocol. So they are separate initiatives, and it also allows us to create that strong tie and connection between these standard bodies that allows us to, get Covisa code working with, projects and software and things that are being developed in SDV as well. And it allowed us to divide and conquer the focus of, you know, what do we do as a community for defining these vehicle services in a standard way? Focus that on Covisa. How all of these apps and services talk to each other, and building that common middleware, we can focus that on Eclipse SDV. Um, and so that's it.